Hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our discussion on workforce development in the creative practices in art education. I am happy to be here with my panelists. In Galesburg is my first time in this town. It's awesome, the little bit that I saw so far. And being here at one state and looking forward to our discussion. My name is Amor Montes. I am Director of Strategic Initiatives at 2112. We are the first incubator in the entertainment industry nationwide. And I just have a couple of housekeeping reminders for all of us. If you post on social media, please tag One State Illinois with your social post. And I'd like to just get started. I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves briefly, and we'll start on the farther.
Okay, my name is Tammy Diefendorf, and I'm with Bridgeway. We are not-for-profit that does workforce development for people with disabilities, vocational training services, and some life skills. I am also here with another panelist who we do packaging and fulfillment services for.
My name is Acerra. I am the Artistic Director at Blox LLC. We're a maker of educational high-performance engineering blocks that are for kids and adults. And we've been working with Bridgeway, and they're a kind of a turnkey solution for small businesses like ours because they can do packaging, they can do IT, they can do customer service, they can do fulfillment. So they're amazing. And then we don't have to get employees and pay health insurance and all that kind of stuff because they can just do this stuff for us. So they've been awesome. We started off at a barn in Cameron, Illinois with a bunch of kids helping us pack. I paid them pizza and toys. And we just were making the toys, they're little elves. And they came by and said, boy, we'd love to have you as a client. So that's what happened. They took us as a client, and it's been wonderful.
Hi everyone, I'm Stephanie. I'm with MakerGirl. We're a nonprofit organization that does 3D printing and STEM classes with elementary school girls. And we're located at the University of Illinois and Northwestern University.
My name is Kathleen Ridlon, and I am an assistant professor of dance and the director of the Klein Center for Community Service here at Knox College. So earlier this morning, I was performing an excerpt of Water Dance in Alumni Hall. And then now I'm here as a part of this panel. I'm really excited to be here. My interest is in creating opportunities for students to put their learning to use in the communities where they live. So I'm really focusing on that college to career readiness in my pedagogy.
Thank you. Well, I just have a question for all our panelists. What do you think is the most critical skill a student can develop in their education to prepare them for work? What do you think would be the most useful?
I was like, do you want everybody to answer?
Yeah. In your opinion, what do you think would be the top priority?
Well, I can jump in here.
Sure.
I think in relation to the arts, I was having a discussion with a colleague, a young colleague who is a recent graduate of Knox and is currently serving in AmeriCorps Vista position in the Klein Center. And she started talking about conscientiousness. And so I think that we hear a lot about, sort of these hard skills that can be applied to these high-paying jobs. And so I think when we start to think about the arts and experience with the arts, if we could link a skill like conscientiousness to something that you get when you work as an artist or are exposed to art practices. I think that would be a paramount skill to have, because if you're really paying attention to what you're doing and how you're doing it, then you're going to be more successful than if you're just going through the motions. And so I think specific to dance, because that's what I do. I often tell people to bring their body with them when they go into the interview, or when they are, maybe unloading a truck, to get things, from one place to another, and think about how are you lifting things, and what is a sort of an economic use of your energy, yeah? So I think awareness, conscientiousness is a good skill to develop.
That's great.
I think it's tiered. Like, little children should be taught manners. Because if you're the kid that says, yes, ma'am, no, yes, sir, it does what they say they're going to do, looks people in the eye, and shakes their hands like it's not a dead fish, things like that usually will help you get the job shoveling snow, or adults will appreciate you. And that careens right into after college. Just having basic manners, I think, is something that can be taught to little children and make society way better. And then I'm more progressive then when it comes to education, because I think that we're given these amazing little connection-making machines to children, and it's dangerous to make the assumption that we better turn them into something that people need. And what we ought to be doing is saying, hey, how you doing? What's going on up there? How can we channel you into whatever's going on up there so you could expand upon that? I know we usually save that until liberal arts education. It's too late. Mm-hmm. It should be happening when they're 4 and 5 and 6 years old. And math is kind of important, and school is kind of important, but the really interesting people in our society are interesting despite education, usually. It's usually, they couldn't wait to get out of school and start, Microsoft or Apple or whatever. They just were like, we're busting, or wanted to be a comedian. So we have to get out of kids' ways and give them a nurturing garden, like a kindergarten, like our makerspace, to explore their natural connection-making machines already going mile a minute.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from MakerGirl.
Yeah, definitely. Going off of what you just said, with MakerGirl, we're obviously focused on STEM and STEAM, and we would love if all the girls who go through our program become interested or continue to pursue their interest in STEM and STEAM. But even more so than that, we just want to provide them with a space where they can try something new. Most of the girls who come through have never designed a 3D object or worked with a 3D printer. So our broader goal beyond STEM and STEAM is just to provide them with a space to try something new, build their confidence in failing and trying it again and succeeding, and then hope that they can take that with them as they go on to whatever they continue to do. I mean, they're only 7 to 10 years old, so we're not expecting every single one of them to pursue a STEM career when they get older, but we want to just provide them with a new opportunity that opens their mind to whatever they're interested in.
I think that too, new opportunities are always, making changes, but I think it's important as kids to know that people are different and just kind of understand that, not just people with disabilities, but all people. And a lot of us are from small towns where maybe you didn't know that until you branched out. But I think that just being aware of that and acknowledging that is important. I mean,
yeah, it's stifling for a kid to believe the myth that we adults know what we're doing. And we like to keep up that lie because it gives us authority. But we're so full of it, and we know we are. So I think if you disabuse kids of that myth that we're just kind of making it up as we go along too, they're like, really? And I think they have a place. Otherwise, it's just oppressive authority, and that's why you always get them on their phones getting the heck out of this reality. So, I can't blame them sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's great. Let me ask you about the role of arts education in workforce development. I know you're a professor here, mm-hmm. right, at Knox College. What do you see the future of, or the role of arts education as with this future workforce,
mm-hmm.
more skilled, more technology-based mm-hmm. learning?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that as far as workforce development is concerned, I have had a great deal of success in using community-based learning as a pedagogy. So linking dance studies, the study of modern dance, with community-based learning, because it brings the learning outside of the classroom and it takes it from a theory to practice. And I think...
Can you give us an example of community-based learning?
It's where the learning takes place. It's actually an examination of where does learning take place. And so learning doesn't have to take place just in a classroom with somebody at the front who apparently has all the answers and other people facing that person. It can take place in a space like this. It can take place at the grocery store. So it really, it changes the dynamics of who has the information and who needs the information. And so the teacher, so I bring students from dance into a local school, and we teach a series of dance classes in a PE class. And so my college students are learning from the teachers and the students, and those students, the 4th and 5th graders, are learning from college students who are now serving in this teacher role. So it changes the roles that we have, or our titles, or our positions. And I think that kind of learning and that kind of teaching and learning dynamic is key to workforce development, because when you leave an institution like a college or a university, you need to assume the position of someone that is ready to contribute, someone that can look at a situation and give ideas for how to solve problems. And those answers and ideas are not going to be thumbed through in a book that we can look up and find. Those answers come from experiences like being put in the front of the room, so to speak. So I think when you have to teach what you have learned, you learn differently, because you know that you're going to have to come from, I'm receiving this information, to I need to now deliver and share this information. And so it's more active. It makes the learning more active.
So I'd like to ask Tammy, how, in your role at Bridgeway, how do you train employees and how are they ready? How do you go about it?
For us with workforce development, with our consumer trainees, I'm going to use some examples from Blox and some of the things that they do. Their blocks have some different shapes, different colors. We also have some counting that we would do, and so we create these placemats that help to learn counting skills, shape skills. Mostly the counting is very important, and I think that they've added some new lines for their products. I mean, we started with just square blocks and now have moved to triangular shaped trigons, and those kind of helpful shapes. That was for us. That was pretty exciting because we got to add.
Do they know about the consumers? Does the audience know about the consumers? Just that they're people with developmental or intellectual disabilities. Certainly adults, it's an adult learning program, and it's done in the majority of our centers. We have several locations, and it's done primarily in Macomb, Illinois, is where this service is done.
So for us who are not terribly familiar with your organization, is this, do you give hands-on training intensive, pretty casual? What's the approach in readiness?
So a lot of our programs require you to do things such as apply for the job. We think that's obviously a very important part of getting a job, is learning how to fill out an application appropriately, and then all of the processes that go along with that. So helping with skills on how to dress appropriately for an interview, how to answer interview questions appropriately. And so we really do follow the whole process.
Okay.
And then once you're hired onto the work center as an employee, then you would learn skills based on the jobs that we have at that work center. And so Lux, though, has been very good for us as far as those types of skills, and especially with counting. I mean, counties, I think, are probably our biggest job there.
That's awesome. Anybody else would like to add anything?
Yeah, I'll add to that. Just working with 7 to 10-year-old girls, and the time I've been with MakerGirl, we started in 2014, and we saw STEM turn into STEAM, so they added arts, and I just see moving forward. Yeah, and what we do, so just like give you an idea of what we do. So the girls, they come into our session, they draw out their ideas on paper, and then we take those pieces of paper and show them how to turn them into a 3D object on the computer. We use like a kid-friendly CADing software program that's free, so they can use it when they go home as well. And then when they're done designing, we print out their object, and they can take it home with them. So it is very, like, it is STEM, but it also is creative. There's the A in there for STEAM, and we do a lot of that. And just in those 4 years, we saw STEM turn to STEAM, and I think that'll continue to move forward. Kind of the intersection between STEM and the arts is really important. And even in the 4 years that I've been with MakerGirl, we've also seen a lot of schools have maker spaces, whether that's a maker cart that they bring into the classroom or a full room dedicated as a maker space. And I just see that trend continuing. The hands-on like projects and skills that they learn in schools, I think, is really important, especially like at the middle school and high school level for workforce development.
It's interesting how we're always pursuing these like, it's real if it's an acronym. So it's like, well, the FBI, it's STEM. So, and it makes it somehow, like, it reminds me of the Depression, like the N, whatever, the WPA, and these acronyms are amazing. Coming from an arts background, a very traditional arts background, being a figurative painter and draftsman, the Renaissance was the great maker movement. I mean, that's what it was. Yeah. And the Bauhaus in the early 20th century was a maker movement. So these countries go through these cycles of, Germany got really the reputation of being the worst nation in Europe for craftsmanship, believe it or not. And they literally got together and formed almost like a medieval guild and said, we're going to have a thing called a standard. And you can't call yourself a candlestick maker if you don't go to this standard. And they reinvented themselves. And so everything that came out of Germany after the 1920s was like the best. So I'd see the STEM movement as kind of a quasi-nationalistic movement. Because if America has anything is an advantage over, for instance, Asia, if you can call something Asia, it's that we are creative and kind of lateral thinking and not putting our kids in these yoken tracks that they have to follow from the age of 4 on, where you will play violin and piano and you will be an engineer like your mother and father and grandfather and everybody else. And I know it's a stereotype, but it's a real stereotype. And Americans don't have that problem. We have other problems. But creativity is not one of our problems. And so I think that places like makerspaces kind of funnel that creative energy into tools and making things that's positive.
I'm going to take advantage of that and move us a little bit forward into incorporating more tech into our education. Do you see a role for artificial intelligence, especially in manufacturing for your products? Do you see a role, or how do you prepare her trainees, employees, both, in preparing for automation for some of the processes that you have at your factory?
It's a very difficult conversation because when you're talking about using AI in the factory, in our particular instance, we like that hands-on work. We have, in order to accommodate for larger volume, we do add some of the things that we do for packaging would involve polybagging, and so we do now utilize some technology as far as like an auto bag machine, and then also teaching the skills of how to use that. Unfortunately, we are not in the process or in the business of losing personal jobs in exchange for a machine. So it's kind of different in our world to do that, where a lot of places are really wanting, to automate everything, and you just kind of lose that personal touch. So we still get to try to keep jobs as often as we can to not be automated.
Let me ask you, have you, in your industry, are there other organizations like yours that have incorporated automation or AI into their production?
I think other corporations like ours are doing it the same way, where we're kind of, often we create fixtures or ways to make a job easier, or ways to also make it so that other people, depending on your disability, can do the job. Mm-hmm. So often we have people who come to us with maybe no use of one of their arms, and we try to create a space and a job in a way that works for them.
Sure.
So it's kind of exciting for us that we get to do that. But as we move out into community employment, which is ultimately the goal for everyone in our programs, we do think that there's that need to be trained on how to do things further, with machines, and I think the auto bagger is a good example of that.
I think it's super interesting to see you guys adapting technology to the workers versus using technology to replace your workers.
Yes.
And,
but that's the point of technology, is to replace workers. Pretty much.
Sometimes, yes.
Almost always.
Well, just I guess.
Well, I think it's also about access. So, I mean, from a dance perspective, I think I have an obligation to share with the dance students that this computer, this phone, this tablet, this gadget in their hand can put them into direct contact with iconic dance makers across the world. So I think that technology has done a tremendous amount for advancing dance and education, because we have greater access to looking at a work like Revelations from Alvin Ailey, who formed a company in 1958 in New York City, and to be able to see that work with a few presses of a button and a swipe and a tap, there it is. And so that for me is the way that I would integrate technology, is about access, so that students can access that machine, that great machine that some of us didn't have when we were in college. And while you're reading the text, to come across a name or a description of a dance work and then just type it in, and there it appears.
Right.
I mean, that is like...
I should clarify, technology eliminates mechanical work. So in one way, technology is really good for the humanities, because all we're going to be left is like little naked monkeys in the end. Everything's going to be done for us. So if we learn how to dance or draw or do something that robots aren't really doing real well, then the robots are doing it better than we are, like everything. So I think arts are a great savior for our nation, is that the pressure is, what do you got going? Because machines don't do everything else for you now, in a sense.
Yeah, I'd like to know, I'd like to ask Stephanie if you can comment on his opinion on how, if robots, I mean, you have MakerGirl, and you're encouraging girls to use machinery to express or experience something new or be exposed to a different area of the sciences. And how let me rephrase that. What do you want to see with that knowledge as they grow? What kind of questions do they have? What do they ask you, like, why do I need to know that for? And what's the goal?
Yeah, so when we were doing our research to make MakerGirl, what we found is that interest in STEM for girls tends to drop off around middle school. And it's not because they're any better or worse at those subjects than like their male counterparts. It's that there's a lack of female role models in those fields, and they don't see themselves pursuing that path because they don't see anyone that looks like them in those careers. So our goal through this program is to just show them, we're run by university students, so we show them female university students who are studying engineering and are studying science, chemistry. We have a whole range computer science, and to show them that there are girls that look like them that are going to be pursuing these careers. And so our goal for them is just to like be able to picture themselves following these STEM and STEAM career paths. So that's the goal. And the machinery, like using the 3D printers, I think that part is a little secondary. I think the process that they go through, the design process, is important. And I think the 3D visualization that they have to do when they're CADing, like rotating their objects and making sure all the objects are connected, that's a very important skill that that they work on and that they learn and that they'll use going forward. But I think the actual 3D printer, we could use a laser cutter, we could use a 3D printer, we could use like a vinyl cutter. I don't think it's not necessarily the actual machine that we're using, it's more so like the process that they're going through.
I think one of the lost skills, and I am really progressive, obviously, my thoughts about kids, but one of the lost skills that's a terrible thing for me is I think kids aren't learning how to draw anymore. And the ones that have the proclivity to draw don't have anything to do with it because we're not really bringing that skill up anymore. And I think the Tinkercad and the CAD is not a decent replacement for drawing, like a robot dancer would not be a good replacement for a dancer. So it's a great humanistic tradition of visualizing and expressing that's being lost. We're losing our connection to our hand. We're just doing this now.
The kinesthetic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was going to be my next question. If you have noticed a trend, a loss in skill, or an upward trend in other skills that we didn't see before this whole intake of tablets and new technology.
That's the maker movement. The maker movement is a reaction against the tablet, in a sense. Seamstresses and leather workers, and if you've been to a Maker Fest, you've seen it, a Maker Fair. There's people with iron and welders, and the kids are loving it because these are human things, and the kids want to have their hands on the adult tools.
I've definitely noticed an appreciation for handmade goods or more crafted, even if they're more expensive, which was the reason why we went away from handmade goods. Right. Cheaper, faster. So I've definitely noticed that myself. Well, let's talk about retraining workers. As new technologies evolved and new trends, new materials, new thinking, what should we do with the current workforce? What do you think should be how can we anticipate these trends so that we are ready for these new positions or being able to shift into a different position? You said earlier for your organization, they came up with a different block, so you had to adapt your current. So imagine that, but for a much larger industry. What can we do to be more savvy, to be able to adapt to change a little quicker?
I think for us, as the scale increases and as volume increases, you have to be prepared to adapt to that. Because if you're not, then they'll have to go somewhere else.
Sure. But you're the employer. But what can we do as students, as workers? I'm
not sure, because I see a trend going back to vocational training. I mean, my son is 19. He's going to go into an electrical program. So I see that change coming back.
I was going to agree with her. My son's probably going to be an electrician too. We have to disabuse ourselves or stop our prejudice of what we think is appropriate career paths and inappropriate career paths. Work is a glorious thing. I grew up in a construction family in Chicago, an Italian-American family. My dad was a contractor. He grew up in the Depression. His mother almost killed herself because my grandfather lost his home in the Depression. And he promised her in the Philippines during battle, he wrote her, he said, I promise when I come back home, Mom, I'll build you a new house, fully well knowing he's probably going to get killed, right? And so there was lots of pride in being able to build your mom a house. And growing up on building sites with concrete guys and drywall guys and tile guys, I love the smell of a work site. And kids don't get that as much anymore. So they're missing out on these human activities where we build houses and we make the wire. And in the 19th century, you'd go into a shop and they'd have, talking about technology, and they'd have, the kid would be putting coal to light a boiler to make steam, to drive a piston, to go on a belt that would drive belts all over the shop. And if you wanted to go on a lathe, you'd engage a clutch, and the belts would be driven all around the ceiling and go into a lathe or a sewing machine. And you saw how everything worked. And now we have electricity, and it's like magic. It might as well be magic. There's no intellectual process going on. Phones are magic. But when a grandparent goes, oh, my kid, he knows how to program a computer. Look at him on his phone. I'm like, he doesn't know even basic. He knows no programming at all. He doesn't know how a circuit works. So it's just frustrating to see that. Look what he drew on his tablet. He didn't draw that. He had a menu, and he picked from a menu, and somebody else drew it a long time ago. So that's what frustrates me. Is in the 19th century, kids had an advantage that they were dealing with the world. And now I don't know what they're dealing with.
That's very interesting. Definitely. Anybody else like to add to that? It resonates with me. I have a teen son, and he's a little bit far removed from making things, and I think the counterbalance is for parents, for us to try to push back a little bit on the reliance on technology and that removal, filling the gap there. But I think it's a new challenge for parents, and I don't know what to think about parents who have 1-year-olds, like, oh, I'm so glad mine is 17 now.
I think one of the things that is important is the sense of responsibility that we're not just, I guess I'm kind of thinking about leading and following. I think we need to be leaders and we need to be followers. We need to be able to assume both positions. And so I think maybe in the arts, we become responsible for our actions in a way that when we're building or making something, or when we're wrestling with some concept to try to create something, that we're responsible for that choice. So I think, with regard to what can we do in the workforce, to help workers have more of a self-investment in what they're doing, is to give them some ownership in the process, that they are responsible for this part of this job. Going back to this AmeriCorps Vista that's working in my office, who's really learning how to function as a professional in this, worker's world. I give her major projects where she is, in charge of a production from, soup to nuts is what we used to say, from the very beginning of the idea till the very end of it, setting it up. Using your imagination. The arts helps you use your imagination so that you see yourself walking into the event and what needs to be there when you arrive. Because you, as the person who is in charge and responsible, is responsible for getting all of those pieces in place. And that is a valuable skill, to be able to produce something, be it a work of art or an event. I think paramount, we need to make the connection between art making and more practical. It doesn't have to be ethereal. It doesn't have to be super magnificent, aesthetically pleasing. But there are applications to these skills in our practical worlds.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I do believe that the critical thinking and the creative process is the key to innovation and creativity in the development of all these workforce initiatives and keeping us all able to function in our society.
We find with our consumer trainees that that ownership is really important, and so showing them the Lux Blox website and that you guys made these products, like you packaged this, and like people all over the world are buying these products. Mike coming to visit us is really important to our consumer trainees. They like to see him. They know that he owns this company. We also make beehives, and they still have a catalog, and so we like to show the catalog that you guys made these products. You are a very important part of this process, and these items are being sold out, to everyone, and just kind of sharing that information. We're
losing a connection. The internet gives us connection, but we're losing connection too, because the urban culture, as a tendency, divorces itself from the country culture. since the Middle Ages, but now it's even more so. So it's like, where does food come from? You know, where does work come from? Where does products come from? They come from boxes, these metal boxes on boats, from these weird countries that I'm not going to go to because they're kind of dangerous. So it's like, so you get this really urbane, first world viewpoint, right, that makes us these kind of creative but useless people. And I think the maker movement's kind of embraced it like the other way. Like, let's become useful again. Let's be creative again and apply it and build things. So I think we're having a tendency to say we're too first world. It's kind of gross.
Yeah.
Going off what you said about like the creative process and like making something, I think one of the reasons why we chose 3D printing originally is that it allows the girls to watch their design come to life, and it's something tangible that they created. It doesn't look like anyone else's, and they can take it home with them, and then they have that memory and that story of what they did in our session. So that's a really important part of our program.
I can see that making
That
an
3D
impact.
thing is really important.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to see or get a sense of where we are with our audience and making sure that we're touching on things that you guys are curious about. Is there?
Yeah, so you guys are also entrepreneurs. One thing I love about the movement is that it does give people this tangible sense of seeing the process from start to finish. It does bring it back to more of a local sense of creating and getting things out in the community. When you talk about workforce development, though, and using the make movement and using the arts, how do you educate people about the entrepreneurial side of it as well? Oops. How do you put this on? Hello, can you hear me?
No.
Okay. But how are you educating people about the entrepreneurial side of creating and making?
So for MakerGirl, every summer what we do is we go on a road trip. We've done a cross-country road trip, we've done a Midwest road trip, and we bring our sessions to rural and underserved communities that don't necessarily have access to programs like ours. And one of the things we make sure we do is we explain to the girls, you know, listen, like, we started this, like, thing. We are students, and we started this organization, and we worked on it, and we grew it, and like, you can do that too. And so kind of sharing our story with both the 7 to 10-year-old girls that come to our program and also just their parents and our community of followers, I think is really important, because I went to U of I for undergrad, and I discovered MakerGirl my junior year right after they had started, and I had absolutely no idea that students at my university were starting things like this. I had no idea, so I was introduced to this whole world of entrepreneurship that I didn't even know existed before meeting MakerGirl. So I think sharing that story is a really important part of that.
I think it's paramount to work with students on their communication skills, that if you want to create a community dance program, there is establishing a community partnership, which is going to take you making that phone call, writing a script for that phone call, doing that pitch, designing how long is it going to be, all of those communication aspects, what is it, how long, how many times, what is that? So that needs to be created, and then you need to make those phone calls. That's the hardest thing for my students, is to actually call someone on the phone. There's technology. Let's teach people how to use the phone, So that and follow-up, and those follow-up emails. Thank you for meeting with me today. I look forward to seeing you next week. And the day before you arrive, we're looking forward to visiting you tomorrow. And the eye rolling that would go on with my students, like, really? Do you want me to email again? Yes, I do. Because that's what it takes. So that's entrepreneurial, but it's also just high-end communication. Constantly reminding people that you're on your way, and that you'll be there at 2, and the bus is picking them up at 4. So that's what I mean by responsible. Like, that's not just gonna magically happen. You have to do that, and then you have to back up from that, and when is that gonna happen, and how? That's choreography.
It's like the old Mickey Rooney movie, the Mickey Rooney and Dorothy, Judy Garland, and they say, let's put on a show. And wow, when kids put on a show, they have to use globally their entire entrepreneurial brain because it's being an impresario, it's getting all the talent, it's making sure you got to kick them in the butt and be a drill sergeant, who's running the box, who's watching the money. I mean, it's everything. So yeah, I used to love those movies. It was like, or the Our Gang comedies where they have their businesses. And as a kid, you got inspired, like, yeah, I want to make money too. Let's make a business. So I think by doing entrepreneurship, you learn entrepreneurship, and by being around entrepreneurs, you kind of old school. You kind of see what they do, right?
Let me add, in our incubator, we have over 100 startups and entrepreneurs working in the creative industries. Our role as an incubator is to provide resources to help those concepts become a business or an enterprise. And the role of entrepreneurship in the maker movement is, I think, critical, because it's the opportunity, it's the mindset of an entrepreneur that sees an opportunity to create or to make something that they're passionate about. I'm personally passionate about entrepreneurship, and I love to see the spark in our interns, all the students that I take in. When it finally clicks, it's entrepreneurship is something that you can never turn off. Most people that get entrepreneurship cannot stop. You create 100 businesses and only one will take, and it only takes one to move forward. But the mindset and the skill and the thinking doesn't go away with that failed startup. What I like to emphasize on our students is that awareness of seeing an opportunity. There are gaps in industries everywhere, and it's up to that student to realize that not everything has been thought of, not everything has been created, everything continues to be changing, and it's your experience, your knowledge that can bring true innovation to a space that isn't there yet. In our role, then we can support that concept and see if there's a market for it. The other very important thing for entrepreneurs is to realize whether it's something that they're passionate about or this is something that they can make money from. And it's usually the last question that they ask themselves because they are excited about the opportunity. And it's demoralizing sometimes when somebody like me comes along and goes, okay, so how are you going to make money with this? Because for creative people, it's not the very first thing you think about. It's usually the last. And I feel that at some point, you have to make that informed decision on whether this is something that you just care about and that you want to see come through as a process, or something that you just care about, or is there a true financial model for your concept? Is there a market for your idea or your innovation? And that's a completely different question. But the mindset and the skill is always there. Once it clicks, like I said, it's never going to turn off. It's a 24/7 mindset for sure. And it's hard work. Entrepreneurship is very, very hard work. And it's not for the faint at heart. So if you're thinking about entrepreneurship in the creative industries, be ready to work very, very hard. So, great question. Anything else that I don't want to run out of time and I want to make sure that we touch on everything that may be on your mind. Anybody? No questions. Okay, well,
She has one.
In the back.
there you go.
Okay, so do you think that what we create sometimes is almost making up for a lack in art education in our schools? There are kids not having opportunities. For instance, I'm from Quincy, Illinois. We don't have K through 3rd grade visual arts because it's not required by the state. So my organization, we go into the schools, but we don't want to be a crutch either. So I just wanted to kind of hear opinions about that.
Guys?
Art education.
Did you say that you don't give credit either? What was the last part of that?
Oh, I just wanted your opinions about you know, do we create things because there's lack of arts education in the schools? And we know that these children need to be well-rounded, but are we responding to that lack, or are we seeing something that's needed in the community? Like, what do you think that plays a part in your decision-making of how you use art education with workforce development?
I definitely would speak to the access point. I think that every child should have access to the arts. I think it's more common for children in K-12 to have access to the visual arts or the musical arts than it is theater and dance. Whereas we are mandated by a country with this shared curriculum to have all of the arts. So I definitely have access in mind when I seek to create opportunities for students to put their learning to use, because I think that there is a need for our arts exposure. And I truly believe that it makes a difference. So yes, it totally informs the why I do what I do, because I'm all about creating access.
Look what succeeds. What succeeds is sports. Why does it succeed? You have feeder programs, Pee Wee, Pony League, Little League, mid leagues, leagues, tons of leagues, right? And you have parent support. You have financial support from the community. They build a diamond. It's crazy, right? What succeeds? Music succeeds. Why? Because we have academies, we have schools, we have conservatories, because we expect to go into the Orpheum Theater and hear a concert conducted by a Philharmonic Orchestra, and they're not going to suck. So there's a system in place to make sure it happens. There's money in place that's going to pay. There's an economy around it, right? And that my point is that look at what succeeds, and then why aren't we making many artists, right? Why do we have to hire Canadians and British people to be in all the American roles in movies? Because they know how to speak English. Almost everybody in an action movie that are American characters tend to be Brits or Australians. Why is that? Because they come from the culture where kids get theater early on. They're good at speaking, and they value English. So yeah, so follow the money and follow the training, and then wonder why there's gaps in our culture. We're not doing that. That's simple, kind of.
Does that answer your question? Yes. Great. A couple more questions. Go ahead. Whoever's closest.
So mine's not so much maybe a question, but maybe something just to reflect on. Something that we're seeing in our programs is that by the time we're working with some of our students and trying to do some workforce development, this understanding of the importance of grit, of kind of failing forward, is not something that they want to do, they know how to do. They won't take risks because they don't understand, they don't want to fail. They've been kind of, I think, trained in school, in their systems, to not want to step outside of their comfort zones. And so I'm just wondering, obviously creativity and the arts have such an important role in allowing kids and young people to play and to develop that grit. And I think it's an essential tool in the workforce development. So I'm just, if everyone has experience with that or developing that with young people, and kind of, I guess, your just reflections on that role of grit and the role of the arts in developing that.
I can start that. I agree with you. I think it's very difficult to not be praised. We are hungry for positive reinforcement nonstop. Every 2 minutes, we want to make sure that we're getting some sort of, you're doing a good job. And we've created an insatiable need for that reinforcement. So what happens in the workforce? Or when I take on an intern that the work is not spectacular, it's okay, but it's not blowing me away, it's not impressing me. Then it's a disappointment for the student, and not for myself, because I know that I have a student, they're there to learn. I have a clear understanding what their relationship is. But for them, they're transposing that constant reinforcement from whenever up until they get to take a job with me. And it causes friction, and it causes the student to adapt. And I don't know, it's not an easy position to be. What happens then is that you have to remind the student that they're responsible, that they're this, that you expect this. You have to be more forward, more proactive in what your expectation, what the level of the expectation is in order for that student to push themselves to deliver at the level that you want. Because we have been praising for mediocrity for a long, long time. You're praising for basic things nonstop. So why go any further? You don't need to. You already got praised for this much. I think it's critical in our roles to not be so nice. And I mean that sweetly. There's no, you can push a student, you can push for excellence while being constructive. You don't have to be, I don't know, there's a sweet spot there where you can push for excellence without being a horrible person and destroying this person at the same time. We've lost that feedback skill and able to assess that feedback and use that to improve your work or yourself. It's tough to hear criticism now. I don't know why. We're hypersensitive. I don't know where it started. I don't know where it's going with it. But you know, if I put something on Instagram, I only get 13 likes instead of 500. What's going on? You know, maybe my lighting was not great. I don't know, but it has a definite impact into the quality of the work that we're producing. And we have to remedy that a little bit. I think that we have to take back some of the feedback and some of the analyzing that criticism. And stop accepting mediocrity. I mean, you just have to stop right there. Just send it back.
But we could look at what works. Dance, if you look at a ballerina or a gymnast, they have grit. They have to have grit, because it's horrible. To get to a certain level of ballet, or any kind of dance, it's really grueling. Look at a ballerina's foot. It's horrible. So, and gymnasts, we know they go through it. It's just grueling work. And athletics, obviously. And my kid did Suzuki violin and cello. My son started at 3.5. Now he's at Indiana University. He's a composition cello major. But at 3.5, he knows his cello teacher way more than his aunts and uncles. And but Suzuki, they start so young, they get their 10,000 hours in, and it's always about making mistakes. You're making mistakes all the time. Make mistake forward. It's all it is, mistakes for 20 years. Because you have that standard, how to play the Beethoven concerto, right? And you have Yo-Yo Ma, and you have all these great people. So that system has built into it this pyramid of greatness. Itzhak Perlman, Yo-Yo Ma. It's like these gods, right? But I come from the visual arts tradition. Visual arts had a hard time in the 20th century. We kind of went in all different weird directions, right? And the Renaissance was kind of easy. There's the human body. It's freaking perfect. What do you do with that, Michelangelo? Oh my gosh, right? And in the 20th century, it was like we kind of broke standards. And it's hard with a kid who's drawing and he wants to draw a caterpillar perfectly, and you're saying, well, but look at how Ridlon did a caterpillar. Look how this, and there's so many ways to do it. The kid doesn't know how to advance as much. So I have a personal problem with the visual arts tradition in the 21st century because we got a little sideways. But look at what works. To get the grit, you have to have the program that says there's a standard. In the Olympics, we have it. In music, we still have it. In athletics, we have it. In dance, we still have it. Even modern dancers that are freeform are unbelievable athletes. They to get to a certain level.
So right? Why are we not translating that standard when you go take a job at a corporation?
I was going to say that. I think it's different in sports because I think that it, in theory, was a great idea that everyone gets an award. Everyone gets participation. But that's not the real world. We don't all win. And I think that we're seeing that changing back, that, you know, there is a team that is better. And if you're teaching that in Pee Wee softball or Pee Wee or the T-ball, it's not very realistic for what you're going to go
But
into
adult
in the
culture
future.
doesn't accept it, though.
Yeah,
Adult
no.
culture won't accept that.
So I think
we're
starting
saying that
very
we're
young-
bursting the bubble at that first job.
Yes.
And that might be a hard thing to break at that age.
Yeah, and I think that letting people know if they're trying something, if they're trying to make that transition, letting them know that being upfront about, you know what, this might fail. You know, a example is we hosted a community dance day as a part of this course that I taught, community outreach, programming in the arts. And we spent a long time preparing for it, all the details, communicating and posters and newspaper advertisements and writing those things, all of that. And I kept preparing the students. Now we're going to have our table and it's going to be set up. We're going to have all of the signs up. We're going to be all ready to go. And maybe no one is going to walk through that door. So you need to be prepared for how you're going to feel when you're sitting behind that table and not one person walks through that door. Because that might happen. And that's okay. Right? Because we do have all of these things in place, and we did all of these things. So now we can investigate that. Now, that's a place for us to look at. Oh, maybe we should have advertised sooner. Maybe we need more community connections. Maybe I need to reach out to that woman that I was on that panel with and say, can you bring 4 of your people over here, please? Because I got my, you know? So what is that? And then troubleshooting that. So, and teaching students that that's what it takes to get people to come to your thing. You know, that's the entrepreneurial part, I think, of the performing arts anyway, is getting people to come in and sit in these seats. How are you going to do it? You know, it's not one phone call.
He had a question I don't want to forget. Yeah, go ahead.
Working with these young girls, you definitely see the range of grit, the ones who have it and would sit there designing on the computer for hours if you let them. They never ask a question. They just keep trying things, deleting, trying it again. And then you get the girls on the other end who don't even want to start without like your help. And so it's kind of like figuring out, they like want you to do it for them. And you're like, no, you're going to do this. Like, I'll sit there with you for the first shape and I'll show you how to make it bigger and smaller. And then moving forward, like you are going to do it. And so it's kind of like, even with like typing, we're working with 7 to 10-year-old girls and they do have to do a little bit of typing. It's like they want you to type for them or spell for them. It's like, I'll help you sound it out. How about? And like, you're going to type it and we're going to sound it out together. So I think it's just for the girls who are a little more timid, kind of sitting there with them for a couple minutes, showing them that they can actually do it, and then letting them go and try and experiment in the program.
Does that answer your question? Go ahead.
I wanted to talk about workforce engagement. So people in corporations that are already in a job and then using arts education and creative practices to engage them to become more creative employees and to be able to handle like the challenges of a globalizing economy. So this is an idea that my company has been ruminating over for some time. And we were able to find a pilot office building that employs 2,000 people, and we worked with the property manager of that building to bring in arts engagement activities only for the tenants in the building. What's been interesting is they have one sort of acceptance for art that the employees get to observe. So if we're showing an excerpt of a play, that no one gets very worried about it. But when we bring in arts learning workshops where people have to fill out handsheets and articulate or deal with complex sort of ideas like communications across cultures, a lot of people get really worried about what's going to happen in that room and what is someone going to say. And so this kind of goes back to the sensitivity conversation that Amor, you were talking about earlier. But also, it sends a very confusing message to employees. Do you want us to be creative or not? Because if we're going to solve this problem creatively, then we need the space to make mistakes. So I feel that in the works, in the arts arena, we talk about how we learn from mistakes and the Suzuki 10,000 hours model and all that stuff. But when you get in the workspace, all that kind of goes out the window. And I do think that there's a way for art makers to bring that back into the workspace. and teach people that they're lifelong learners, even if they're not directly learning a business skill, but everything feeds into solving business problems.
That's an enormous thought, because I'm just going to get this started. When you move into a business, whether it's a startup or a corporation, workforce equals money somehow. Every number of hours that you're in a meeting equals a cost that you're not producing, that you're not selling, that you're not this. So corporations need to, and we all need to figure out how much are we willing to invest in that creativity in order for us to be able to live with that cost. It either becomes a line in our budget that allows for that creativity, for that experimentation, for that potential innovation in our system that encourages our employees to think outside the box, or spend 2 hours just thinking versus doing, right? If I walk through a desk and I see somebody just thinking, and I'm paying them whatever it is, 12, 14 bucks an hour, I just see 12 bucks an hour. I'm not appreciating what potential results I can get from that space. And you see big corporations, Google, Amazon, et cetera, they have incorporated those blocks of thinking time. I forget what CEO it was, I read it recently, where it's a mandatory no phone meeting, and things where you're forced to make space to think. And I think we've moved away from that because of productivity, because of cost of workforce, because of this. And it's a balance for small businesses, and it's a balance for entrepreneurs. And I think that would probably be the very first thing that gets crossed off a budget. If you have this much money to launch your startup, I'm gonna be very impressed if I hear a startup going, and we allowed for about 100 hours worth of brainstorming, even though it's a critical part of creating an innovative product. I think it's on the entrepreneur or the business owner to balance that cost.
Yeah, I think going off of that, so our team is, I'm the only full-time employee, the rest of my team they're all university students, and I think just running a startup and a nonprofit, we're all young, we don't know everything that we're doing. It's a learning curve for all of us, and I think one of the things that's really important is kind of, as the leader, kind of like forcing that, like you were saying, like kind of just forcing them to brainstorm and think, like a lot of it's around like fundraising and sponsorship, like how are we've never done any of this before, so how, like, let's sit down, we're going to force, like, everyone's going to come up with 5 contacts that they have at different companies, and like it might feel uncomfortable maybe to reach out to these people, but like this is how it's going to work and we're going to do it, and just like kind of forcing them to do things or challenging them to do things that are a little uncomfortable or new to them. When I was on the team, when I was in school, we did 2 Kickstarter campaigns, and if you know how Kickstarter works, you have to like reach your fundraising goal within the month or you don't get any of your money. So like kind of like the hustle, and I remember the co-founders at the time like sitting us down and was like, okay, you're going to email all these people that you know and you're going to get the money, and it feels really uncomfortable and it's new and you don't know what you're doing, but it's kind of like making that space where we can try something new and kind of like have it come from the leadership on our team. That's how it works. Just like, because it's all new for all of us, so the initiative has to come from someone, and then the rest of the team will like be like, oh, okay, this works, or like we're comfortable doing this.
There's a couple, your question is massive. Because I was thinking about the British Army and the Revolutionary Army and why we were so effective against them, because guys were allowed to hide behind trees and think out of the box while they were all regimented. So you have these hierarchical problems traditionally in hierarchical organizations, whether it's armies or businesses, hierarchical businesses. But allowing for creativity, to me creativity can mean a lot of things. It also means like, it's like just allowing for silly thoughts and lateral thinking, right? So we work with kids, so spending time working with the consumer of your product, like hanging out with them, not in like necessarily a focus group where you're behind glass and it's like a weird, police situation. And focus groups are notoriously wrong. They make really bad data. There's new groups now, these new businesses, I know some of these people who do this, who actually go out and hang out with a woman and watch her do her laundry. And they just hang out with her. But they're getting great data about their company, their culture, their brand, everything else. So I think if your end user, if you know who your end user is, check that assumption. Maybe you don't, right? And because the more you know them, the more your product's going to work, because it's all about their relationship. And with the Revolutionary War, it was like my end user is killing that British guy. I'm going to hide behind the tree and not have to always listen to my general because he had a rich dad. They had a really weird hierarchy, but we as Americans were like, listen, I'm going to hire the smartest guy, the bookkeeper, to be my general. So it's always about, if we get rid of these prejudices and just say, why are we here? Are we here for that person, the consumer? Hang out with them, right? So that's my answer.
Does that answer your question? Yes, okay. We have only a few minutes left. I wonder if there's another question from our audience. And if not, I would like to ask our panelists for some closing remarks, perhaps reflect on what you'd like to see happen in the near future or long-term future, or anything that might be on your mind. You can start.
We all look at you. I know, I'm like, closing remarks. I really came here about Blox, so I hate to put you on the spot, but I feel like the start of your company, is really important in how you came up with that concept with your, I think the product is important. So I think you should. That's
why we hired her.
Good point.
Well, I mean it.
So, yeah, my wife and I had a passion, and we became entrepreneurs. And we had a passion. We learned that people we loved, like Frank Lloyd Wright, local guy, right, and Bucky Fuller from the East Coast, the guy who did the Epcot Center Dome, invented the Geodesic Dome, and Albert Einstein, Le Corbusier, the architect. They all had the same story, that their mind was blown to 6-year-olds. They went to these things called kindergartens. These were the original kindergartens made by a scientist in the 19th century called Froebel, who was a scientist, but he said, the way we look at kids is wrong. It was a scholastic era. They said kids are these useless little baby animals. We can't use them for work. They're just in the way. So let's just try as soon as we can to pump knowledge in their brains and make them like us. And that was scholasticism. Like, there's this body of knowledge they have to learn, and they'll be like us. Workforce, right? And these guys like Montessori and Pestalozzi and Froebel said they were progressives. They said, no, children are like these connection-making machines, potential geniuses. And if we just feed them with these things that are based on nature and natural movement and having gardens, and that the connection-making machine will get fed. And what it produces the new geniuses of the age. And that's an unknown thing. And that's a good thing. We want to create these unknowns to shake things up. So you see how radical a thought that was? So we're like, wow, he was doing this, blowing people's minds away that we thought were geniuses back in the 19th century with everything he knew about science in the 19th century. My wife and I looked at nature, we looked at fractal geometry and Einstein's theory. We said, what do we know about the world now we can put into playthings? And that's what we did. So that we were driven by this belief that we could help kids, and that was like the entrepreneurial spirit, right? And so we got a 3D printer. I hired a 15-year-old German immigrant kid from across the street who was really good at AutoCAD from a robotics challenge, and he was our first employee. And we put 4,000 hours on a MakerBot 2X, and it was breaking all the time. And the kids just grew up around this printer. It was going from morning till night. And we prototyped a toy. We made a toy, and then we brought it to market. How long have you
been in business?
Huh?
How long have you been?
We did that for 3 years. And then we've been in business since 2015. So we've been in stores for 3 years. So that's our story. That kind of relates to this whole what we're talking about.
That's why I thought it was important for him
to give me your time. It's like the Senate. I just give my time to senators from Illinois.
And then she has employees that work there, so it all works out. It's perfect.
So I'll just share a little bit about where our program is headed. I started as our first full-time employee back in September, and Last spring, we expanded to Northwestern University, so that's something we want to continue to do, is expand to other universities across the country. We have a pilot session at Harvard in November, so that's really exciting. But if you are a student or you know a student at a university anywhere that might be interested, please let me know. I'd be happy to share more information about that. And our goal by 2023 is to reach 10,000 girls in our program. And this summer, like I said, we do road trips every summer. This summer we're doing an East Coast version road trip. So we'll be working with universities, schools, summer camps, libraries, museums, any kind of space that's willing to host us. So if that's something that you're interested in as well, please let me know. We're always looking for new connections and places to bring our program.
I think that there's more to dancing than being up on a stage and either entertaining someone or sharing a work of art through your choreography. I think that we need to value the knowledge that our bodies have. So when I talk about bring your body with you, I really think that people need to pay attention to how they feel in their bodies when things are hot, when things are happening, when things are serendipitously falling into place, because something's going on with your body as well. And so pay attention. Sometimes our bodies know before our brains what's going on. And so paying closer attention to how you feel in certain situations. The body has incredible kinesthetic knowledge that is valuable, very valuable, off that stage, down on the ground, in the communities where we live. It's incredible knowledge.
Thank you. I just want to remind you guys to tag your social media posts with One State Illinois, as well as there are some evaluations outside of the auditorium. If you have any feedback, it would be very valuable, especially as we move forward in future programming. Your opinion obviously is important, and what you're looking for as far as resources and programming. On my end, I'd like to thank our panelists for their insight and sharing their expertise with us this afternoon. I'd like to thank you for your attention and also encourage you to reach out if you're intrigued about what we do. If you have, if you're curious about entrepreneurship, please reach out. I'm more than happy to hop on a call with you. If you're in Chicago, come by the incubator. I'm more than happy to give you a tour. And that's it. Thank you very much. Thank you, guys. It's been fantastic.